The year is 1683. Outside the walls of Vienna, the Ottoman army has suffered a decisive defeat. But the true, unseen battle has already been lost back in Istanbul, in the imperial mint. For decades, the axe, once a pillar of stability, has been steadily debased. Silver content, which stood at roughly 0.65 grams in the mid-16th century, has plummeted. By 1640, it contained only 0.28 grams. Now, as the empire's military might falters, its financial foundation has eroded even further. The common man, holding these increasingly worthless coins, feels the invisible tax of inflation, while foreign merchants, demanding true value, turn away. The visible defeat at Vienna is merely the capstone on a long, slow fiscal collapse that has been unfolding for generations, driven by an emperor's insatiable need for funds and a court's short-sighted solutions. Empires, it seems, do not simply vanish. They decay from within, often starting with the very medium that binds their economy, their currency. The history books chronicle battles, reigns, and treaties, yet the deeper, more consistent narrative lies in the ledger. From Rome's denarius to the Spanish silver glut, from Weimar Germany's hyperinflation to the slow, deliberate handover of reserve currency status from sterling to the US dollar, a pattern emerges. It is a cycle driven by incentives, by human nature, and by the relentless arithmetic of debt. This channel decodes that pattern. By the end of this journey through the Ottoman Empire's fiscal decline, you will begin to see the invisible machinery that drives the rise and fall of great powers, and perhaps, the warning signs in our own time. Today, we will trace the financial missteps that eroded the once mighty Ottoman Empire, not as a random series of unfortunate events, but as a recurring sequence of economic blunders that echo across centuries and civilizations. We begin our countdown at blunder number 10. Number 10, the inflexible tax system and the rise of tax farming. The Ottoman Empire's early strength was partly built on a centralized land registration system called the timer where landholders, in exchange for tax revenues from their holdings, were obliged to provide soldiers for the Sultan's army. It was an efficient system for a conquering, agrarian empire. But as the world changed, as trade became more complex and warfare more expensive, the timer system proved too rigid. Revenues were fixed and they couldn't keep pace with rising expenditures. The Ottoman solution, starting particularly in the late 16th and early 17th centuries, was to increasingly shift to iltizam or tax farming. This meant selling the right to collect taxes in a given region to the highest bidder, often for a lump sum upfront. The immediate benefit was a quick injection of cash for the treasury. The long-term cost, however, was immense. The tax farmer, having paid for the privilege, had every incentive to extract as much as possible from the populace, often resorting to brutal methods. This wasn't merely local corruption, it was a systemic outsourcing of revenue collection that detached the state from its taxpayers, eroding trust and stifling economic activity. Farmers, facing arbitrary and excessive levies, saw little reason to invest or produce beyond subsistence. The state lost its direct relationship with the economic health of its citizens, much like a landlord who sells off his property to a third-party speculator, losing all interest in the property's upkeep so long as the rent checks arrive. Number 9, the capitulations and the erosion of sovereignty. From the 16th century onwards, the Ottoman Empire granted various European powers, initially France, then Britain, Russia, and others, treaty agreements known as capitulations. These were originally intended as magnanimous gestures, facilitating trade and protecting foreign merchants within Ottoman lands. They granted extraterritoriality, meaning European citizens living in the empire were subject to their own laws, not Ottoman law. They were also exempt from local taxes and customs duties, or paid vastly reduced rates. What began as a diplomatic tool slowly transformed into a severe economic handicap. As the empire weakened, these capitulations were increasingly exploited. European merchants could undersell local Ottoman producers because they faced fewer taxes and tariffs. This stifled nascent Ottoman industries and made the domestic market a dumping ground for European manufactured goods. The state, starved of vital customs revenues, found its ability to protect and nurture its own economy severely curtailed. It was like a store owner who, in a moment of generosity, allows a competitor to open up inside his shop, rent-free and tax-exempt, eventually driving his own products off the shelves. By the 19th century, these capitulations were shackles on Ottoman economic independence, making it nearly impossible to implement protective tariffs or generate sufficient revenue from foreign trade. Number 8. The price revolution and neglect of mercantilism. While European powers were aggressively pursuing mercantilist policies in the 16th and 17th centuries, accumulating gold and silver and protecting their nascent industries, the Ottoman Empire reacted poorly to the global price revolution. This was largely fueled by the massive influx of silver from the New World into Europe via Spain, causing widespread inflation. Ottoman lands, being part of the global trade network, experienced this inflation too. However, unlike European states that sought to control the flow of precious metals and foster domestic production, the Ottomans seemed largely reactive. They continued to allow the free export of raw materials needed for European industries, while imported European manufactured goods undercut local artisans. The influx of cheap European goods, often financed by foreign credit, further exacerbated the outflow of precious metals from the empire. The Ottoman state failed to develop a coherent economic policy to either retain its silver and gold or to nurture domestic manufacturing that could compete. They were like a household that, during a period of rising prices, continues to sell off its valuable heirlooms for trivial sums while buying more expensive, less durable imported goods, depleting its assets without building new wealth. Number 7. Constant warfare and unsustainable military spending. The Ottoman Empire was, for much of its history, a military machine. Its territorial expansion and long-term dominance were predicated on a powerful army. However, from the late 17th century onwards, constant, large-scale warfare against multiple European powers, the Habsburgs, Russia, Venice, became increasingly expensive and less fruitful. The long wars, often ending in defeat or unfavorable treaties, drained the treasury without yielding new revenue-generating conquests. The costs of equipping, feeding, and paying an army that could no longer reliably expand the empire's resource base forced the Sultan to seek new, often destructive, sources of funding. This included extraordinary taxes, forced loans, and most significantly, currency debasement. A striking example is the Russo-Turkish War of 1768 to 1774, which crippled the Ottoman treasury. The empire could not afford to sustain its immense military without an expanding resource base, creating a vicious cycle where military weakness led to financial distress, which in turn hampered military effectiveness. It was a household that continuously upgraded its security system to defend its borders, but without ever increasing its income, eventually having to sell off its furniture to pay the alarm company. Number 6. Lack of investment in productive capacity. While European nations were undergoing industrialization, developing new technologies, and investing in infrastructure like canals and later railways, the Ottoman Empire largely lagged. Its economic policy, focused on extracting revenue from existing agricultural lands and trade routes, paid insufficient attention to fostering new sources of wealth. There was limited state-sponsored investment in factories, modern agricultural techniques, or even widespread education that could drive innovation. What little investment occurred often came from foreign powers, who built railways or port facilities primarily to extract Ottoman resources and facilitate the sale of their own goods, rather than to genuinely develop the local economy for Ottoman benefit. This meant the empire remained largely agrarian and dependent on raw material exports, vulnerable to price fluctuations and unable to compete with the manufactured goods of industrialized nations. The Ottoman economy was like a farm that continues to plant the same crops year after year, refusing to invest in new tools or techniques, while its neighbors are building factories and diversifying their output. Number 5. Chronic currency debasement. This is the most direct and visible symptom of deep fiscal distress. For centuries, the Ottoman Empire repeatedly resorted to debasing its currency, primarily the silver axe, to meet short-term financial needs, especially during wartime or periods of royal extravagance. The process was simple: reduce the amount of precious metal in each coin while maintaining its nominal value. As we noted, the axe's silver content plummeted from around 0.65 grams in the mid-16th century to 0.28 grams by 1640, and continued its decline thereafter. The immediate effect was a temporary surge in the number of coins minted, providing quick cash for the treasury. The long-term consequences were devastating. Prices soared, inflation, people lost faith in the currency, hoarding good coins and melting them down, while bad coins circulated widely. Merchants, particularly foreign ones, began demanding payment in stable foreign currencies or precious metals, further draining the empire's hard currency reserves. It was an invisible tax on everyone, especially those on fixed incomes or holding savings, and it destroyed economic confidence. Imagine a baker who, to save money, begins to put less flour into his bread. Initially, he sells more loaves, but soon, customers realize the bread is smaller and less satisfying, and they take their business elsewhere, or demand more bread for the same price. Number 4. Excessive borrowing from foreign powers. As the traditional revenue sources proved insufficient and currency debasement became less effective due to the erosion of confidence, the Ottoman Empire turned to foreign loans. The first major foreign loan was taken in 1854 from British and French banks, primarily to finance the Crimean War. This marked a critical turning point. What began as an emergency measure quickly became a habit. Within 2 decades, the Ottoman debt skyrocketed. Between 1854 and 1874, the empire took out 15 separate foreign loans, with an estimated total nominal value of 200 million Ottoman liras. These loans often came with unfavorable terms, high interest rates, and significant discounts, meaning the empire received less cash than the nominal value of the debt it incurred. A substantial portion of new loans was often used simply to service existing debt, creating a debt spiral. This was the precise moment the empire shifted from being master of its own finances to a supplicant, a borrower increasingly beholden to foreign creditors. It's like a person who, unable to pay their bills, takes out a high-interest payday loan, then another, and another, merely to cover the interest on the previous ones, without ever addressing the root cause of their financial woes. Number 3. The public debt administration and loss of fiscal sovereignty. The inevitable consequence of excessive foreign borrowing and an inability to service the debt arrived in 1881 with the establishment of the Ottoman Public Debt Administration, OPDA. After defaulting on its loans in 1875, the European creditors, primarily British, French, German, and Italian, established this body to ensure repayment. The OPDA was an autonomous organization, staffed by Europeans, with control over significant portions of Ottoman state revenue. It directly collected taxes from various monopolies, salt, tobacco, spirits, fisheries, stamp duties, and customs revenues, effectively redirecting them straight to foreign bondholders before they ever reached the Ottoman treasury. At its height, the OPDA controlled revenues amounting to roughly 1/3 of the entire Ottoman budget. This was a profound humiliation and a catastrophic loss of fiscal sovereignty. The empire could no longer truly manage its own budget or decide its own spending priorities. Foreign creditors dictated a large part of its financial policy. It was the ultimate manifestation of the capitulations, extended to the very heart of the state's finances, turning the empire into an economic protectorate. Number 2. Failure to establish a central bank or a stable monetary policy. Throughout its centuries, the Ottoman Empire never fully developed a modern, centralized institution capable of managing its currency and finances effectively, comparable to the central banks emerging in Europe. While there were efforts to establish banks in the 19th century, such as the Imperial Ottoman Bank, they were often foreign-controlled and primarily served the interests of European creditors and foreign trade, rather than actively managing the Ottoman money supply or credit system for imperial benefit. Without a strong central monetary authority, the empire lacked the tools to implement a consistent, stable monetary policy. This contributed to the chronic debasement, the proliferation of different currencies, both official and foreign, and a general lack of confidence in the financial system. It meant the state could not effectively control inflation, manage its debt, or provide a stable financial environment for long-term economic growth. Imagine a household without a budget, where every member spends impulsively, and no one is tracking the income or outgoings. Chaos and insolvency are inevitable. Number 1. The illusion of inevitable grandeur and resistance to fundamental reform. Perhaps the greatest blunder was not a single policy, but a pervasive mindset, the belief that the Ottoman Empire, by virtue of its glorious past and Islamic heritage, was inherently superior and immune to the mundane economic forces that shaped other nations. This bred a deep-seated resistance to fundamental reform, particularly when it came to modernizing economic structures and embracing new financial principles. For centuries, the Ottoman ruling elite viewed European innovations with suspicion, often dismissing them as infidel practices. While some reforms were attempted in the 19th century, known as the Tanzimat, they were often too little, too late, and met with internal resistance from traditionalists. The empire clung to its antiquated systems of revenue collection, military organization, and governance, even as the world around it transformed through industrialization and globalized finance. The ruling class failed to grasp the systemic nature of their economic problems, often attributing decline to moral failings or external conspiracies, rather than the unsustainable mechanics of their own fiscal policies. They believed their unique history would exempt them from the common economic gravity that pulled down other powers. But the ledger keeps no favorites. Every empire, no matter its past glory, operates within the same economic principles. The Ottoman Empire, convinced of its own exceptionalism, failed to adapt until it was too late, until its sovereignty had been mortgaged away, its currency debased into worthlessness, and its economy carved up by foreign powers. The story of its decline is a stark reminder that economic health is not a birthright, but a continuous act of adaptation, sound management, and fiscal discipline. The illusion of grandeur, when untethered from reality, is the most costly blunder of all. The currency dies before the empire does. Subscribe to see the warning signs before they make the history books.